Every day, Tom and Bob Mundell speak with executives as well as operational folks at companies who are making changes to their logistics network and their transportation plan without first modeling the financial and other impacts. Or companies who have adopted expensive software but are only using a fraction of its capabilities. And even worse, in Tom's opinion, not using those capabilities means that your teams are not freed up to do the higher level analytics and optimization where the real savings shows up. Our two presenters are Bob Mundell and Tom French, and we also have a guest. Our agenda is talking about the risk and cost of not adopting a TMS at all, which we find that quite a bit. And then awkward workarounds when installing a TMS. 3, making changes without first modeling the impact. And then incomplete implementations, not taking it all the way to the full capability of the system you adopt. And finally, I do hope we'll have time to answer your questions.
Okay, great. So when we start looking at the first one of these, which is not adopting a TMS at all, we enter in with a lot of companies that are looking at that. And there's a lot of reasons that occurs. And the strange part of that, it occurs not only with shippers who manufacture and distribute, but also with 3PLs. Because it is a challenge to make sure how you're going to do that. And when you start to think about the reasons that you should do it, if you look at the delivered cost of a product in your company, 2/3 of that cost generally will be the transportation. The balance of that is the distribution warehousing. When you stop to think about the opportunities that exist, when you look at what you're doing, transportation drives a lot of what you do. And wanting to see what is the value of having a real lean supply chain by having visibility from the moment you place a purchase order to when that purchase order receives, so that you can schedule manufacturing, all the way through having visibility once it comes off of manufacturing, being able to get it through your DCs and to your customers. So having that visibility allows you to be really lean, turn inventories quicker, because inventories is another huge cost factor if not managed correct. Another reason is, gee, we're just implementing an ERP, or we're in the midst of implementing an ERP, such as SAP or Oracle. And oftentimes when those occur, particularly with those companies, there's a huge issue with their IT staff not having a lot of time. And even though that occurs, it doesn't, and it shouldn't stop you from implementing a TMS, because the cost of not moving forward is really more expensive than it. So what you could do is actually extract spreadsheets and upload spreadsheets into the TMS, and you can get started. If you've implemented one division, you can start to implement that division, work out all of the issues around the implementation, so that as other divisions get started in that ERP system, or if you want to do it through all the ERP systems, then you can do that primarily from integration of each and every one of those ERP systems. It doesn't stop you from doing that. So waiting for a full ERP, these are things we're hearing from customers. Then the last is probably even more important to look at, is we really don't feel like we have the level or skill or the competence to really be able to manage all that. So as we get through this, we'll talk about a lot of this and how we can work around it, or how you should look at it. I encourage everyone who is thinking about it to make sure that they really look at this closely, because choosing not to adopt it will actually cost you more money in what you do, and that money that you save in implementing it may pay for anything and other things that you do within your supply chain. So the next one is really talking about the mistakes when installing a TMS. So when we start to think about the mistakes in doing that, what we find is that a lot of people will implement the IT. They'll implement the TMS. So they're in a business and they're saying, boy, what we need to do is get some automation in dispatching, some automation in putting rates in the system. And so what they end up doing is going out, doing an investigation to find out, here is a TMS that will do that. And what they should be doing is really looking at their processes. So we have a 6-step process that we take most of our clients through. And the very beginning of that starts with the analysis part of what you do. By getting data, and oftentimes people say, well, we're not really able to get the data. The truth is that you do have the data because your carriers have it pretty specific. Now, not down to item level, but certainly down to a shipment level, origin, destination, and characteristics of the freight. Pulling that out then allows you to figure out what you should do before you start moving forward. So that helps you, the analysis, it gives us the network of what you look like, and then it allows you to figure out what are the concepts that we can implement that will really bring us some savings going forward. So you have to look at the process, and you'll have to look at then at where does the touch points in the process occur. This is extremely important as well. So synchronization and also integration of the software is really important. And maybe, Bob, you can talk a little bit about the synchronization and the implementation part of what we do. So how do we touch technologies? Because we have to look at what you're doing in order to figure out what we should be doing there. Bob, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Tom. Yeah, we really find that in the beginning when we're doing the current process and we're developing what we should do from a to-be process perspective, that finding out where we call it the trigger mechanism that comes from the current process and the current, let's say, ERP system, what will be the timing in terms of triggering data to come to the transportation management system to give that visibility to the TMS for planning purposes. So that's one of the first and the most important steps that we do. And the other thing that really impacts that is the amount of change. How do we manage change? Because that's going to figure greatly in terms of where we place that initial trigger to shoot the data, and how much time we have in planning on the TMS side. So that's all important, that first step, as Tom said, of figuring out what your current processes are, where those trigger points should be in terms of getting that visibility to the transportation management system, and what change management looks like. So those are some key other points that we look at.
Yeah, and along with that, when you start to think about the functional areas within the software, a lot of people will look at the TMS particularly and say, boy, we really need this for outbound. And once they get the outbound put into place, they don't think about any of the other modules.
When we started with Salesforce, we wanted to get them to get up and going fairly quickly after we understood their processes. So to get them running inside the TMS, we used I'll call it a simple method of integration using an Excel spreadsheet to integrate to the TMS. And then as we used the system more and they became more sophisticated, we were able to put some more sophisticated integration tools in place. So I think the message here is that you can start in a simple method, using a simple method of integration. Don't let that be such a huge roadblock to start to reap some of the benefits of what TMS has for you. And I think that's really the message that Tom's trying to get at here.
Yes, exactly. Cytosport started really on the outbound product because they had to make sure they kept their customer very satisfied in what they were doing. And then once they've got that working and their team set up to manage that, the next phase was really to look at the inbound. And when we got that set up, then we looked at optimization, and it brought us all the way through continuous improvement. And we'll ask Mike some of those things that he can talk about as we get down there. But getting back to installing a TMS and making mistakes. The other part that we see is people installing the TMS, as we mentioned before, but the workarounds. So we'll go into a system. We had 3PLs in this case that decided they wanted to have many brokers that were in the country to be on their TMS, and they were just adding brokers based on being able to find them and convince them that they ought to join their network. The issue they had was trying to implement what each and every one of those brokers were doing. And when they asked us to get involved, they asked us to bring 4 people back for 2 weeks to help them fix their TMS that they had implemented. And we agreed to come back for an initial meeting. When we went through that meeting, we really identified that maybe it's your business process. If you set your system up so that it really allows you to say, this is the business we want to be in, this is how we want to pay our brokers, and this is the carriers that we want to use, and we can add carriers you need. If you can fit our model, then you're welcome to be a broker. It changed our ability to be able to help them and get them up and running in 30 days without having to spend 4 weeks. Really had them up and running, working the way they wanted to have it. And Bob, you may have another example of a workaround. I mean, some macros as an example. Can you talk a little bit about that? Huh?
Yeah, this gives us a huge clue in terms of where companies are when we see these kinds of external tools like paper and Excel and lots of phone calls and even faxes in the old days. Then that gives us a clue as to where companies are and the kind of strategies that we can help put together and the value that the TMS will bring to them.
Yeah, so when you look at, if you look at the business process, when you go to implement, and it's really, we can't emphasize that more, that you really want to implement the process, not the TMS. So the TMS becomes a tool of choice, as a WMS would become a tool of choice as well. You have to, each and every company we go into are pretty unique in the way that they process what they do, either it's a purchase order or sales order. And that process is unique to that customer. We have to keep that intact. And we want to make sure that we make the TMS fit the process, not the process fit the TMS in both cases. And that's really important and a big, probably the largest mistake we see with most people when we walk in and get involved in implementations. The other part of this, when we look about making changes without really understanding how you should make those changes. When we start to think about the fact that you can model and understand the results of that model prior to executing what you might want to do. And this is really important because it really allows you to understand what takes place if we choose to want to move forward. And Mike, I think you've actually done some studies on your own based on using the technology to aid you in doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah, Tom, we used the same types of principles to determine a new location for our West Coast distribution. We modeled historical shipments from our facility in Benicia and also historical shipments to our facility in Benicia at various locations throughout the West Coast, Las Vegas, Sacramento, Sparks, Nevada, and we settled on Stockton. What we were trying to do was we were trying to create space in our facility in Benicia to expand our manufacturing. And by outsourcing our shipping function to a third party located in Stockton, we were able to do that. Now, it costs a little bit more to outsource, but what we saved on transportation costs far offset the cost of outsourcing distribution function. So it goes back to what you were talking about, where 2/3 of your total distribution costs are attributable to transportation. So just that 90-mile move from Benicia to Stockton yielded about $800,000 in transportation savings in year one. So we were able to model that before we executed it, which was a big deal.
Well, in relation to that as well, when you stop to think about the fact that one of the things that Mike has been able to do is really stay focused on what they do in the supply chain, while the company was really experiencing tremendous growth, a lot of different customers coming in, and as a result, you can imagine that your supply chain really starts to morph a lot, because what you had this year may not be the same as what you have 4 years from now. And what that does is allow you, by going to maybe a 3PL warehouse company or that, to be able to put it in a place that really services you today, but that has to change in 3 years. So it gives you that. But a lot of people take and run the asset first, realizing that transportation is the driver. The asset should be considered secondly, not first in our mind. So another great example is, and this is a third party we work with, one of their customers. They started off and they were buying companies. They started off with 3, then they bought 4 or 5, and this was all over a 2-year period. So they had 4 different ERP systems. But what they wanted to be able to do is try and sell across all manufacturing facilities, similar products. And when you started to look at it in the very beginning, the way that they marketed to their customer, and we did the analysis, it really came out that it should be East Coast, West Coast. As they started adding in all of these new manufacturers, their distributors and customers started ordering less than truckload and started moving to LTL. And then when you looked at the LTL, it really, and you'd analyzed it, it turned out that East and West is now regional, and perhaps they could use their own warehouse associated with their manufacturing facilities to really be effective in service to customers from a regional point of view. So the dynamics of what you can use in the TMS can help you to drive that, particularly when you're looking at a SaaS model environment. You're not programming it, you're picking your functionalities. And, so one of the things we went to Mike about was, hey, Mike, let's, and we saw this in the data, because data can only drive you so far without totally understanding the uniqueness of what you're faced with. Well, we went to Mike and said, Mike, let's optimize, because our data says we really, with the LTL shipments we're making, we can start to really optimize and do multiple stop deliveries. And of course, Mike came back and said, Tom, we sell to the food industry. So maybe, Mike, you could talk a little bit about the fact that by coming back and kind of telling us the constraints around the food industry really had to change the way that we were going to look at how we optimize.
Yeah, Tom. So the food industry has some pretty stringent dock protocol. Appointments, certainly, lumpers to consider, and really, when you're using a TMS to try to execute a plan that's going to be carried out by third parties, it does become difficult. So something that works, an optimized solution that the TMS has driven for you, now becomes unexecutable because of the carriers that the tender's been given to. So while we wanted to optimize, there's certainly cost benefits to it. We were operating under some pretty tight constraints.
Yeah, so when you look at that, this is really what allows you to look at what can you do, and you can model that prior to. And he's absolutely right, because when you talk about service to deliver and making sure your service is always on time, if you have an hour for offload and it becomes 3 hours, the next 2 loads are not going to make it on time. So another advantage or thing to look at is if we could pool that into a truck and take to a region where we have all these customers in the region, we call this sailing schedules, then could we optimize in a truck and do the final delivery through a food pool point where they have standing appointments and they already manage the lumper fee within their own environment and the customers that they service. So this is another area that just by understanding the constraints you have and understanding what to do with it, that you can still use the technology to drive you to get to where you need to be to continually save money. And I think this is the last part of what we really see not happening in most companies, and that's when we talk about continuous improvement process. Once you've got the data in the system, you have clean data. And even when you stop to think about the fact that not only do you have to manage your purchase orders in, we have seen few ERP systems set up where you have all the characteristics to manage a shipment. An example, you may have the bill or the invoice where you pay the vendor, but you don't know where they ship from. They may have multiple ship from locations. The second part of that is most ERP systems, most people have not set up the weights and the cubes of each of their raw material items that they bring into inventory. And so without that, you can't really manage transportation. The TMS allows you to combine all of that so that you can execute seamlessly, even when you don't have that information, because it goes up to a web, hits the vendor gives you all the details, and once you've got the details, now you can manage the transportation, so you can start to see how that affects how you deliver and the visibility from order placement to order receipt. That's an example of taking continuous improvements and trying to figure out what you can do. Do you have any other ones, Bob, that come to mind?
What we're actually looking at here is I'll call it a daily operational optimization. So what you're seeing here is an in-action plan of how you would do an optimization on a daily basis. So you see up in the upper left-hand corner, 160 shipments that were put into this plan. And the direct cost of these was just above $207,000. That set down the baseline of what it would cost if we ran these point-to-point. So we ran it through the optimization, and it created 106 loads, and the optimized cost of that was $174,000. So it reduced that cost and created a savings of $32,580, or 15.7% savings. So what we do here is we actually teach the operations people who do the actual execution how to use this tool to see the loads that a transportation management system is building, look at those things for reasonability, and not only that, we teach them how to do the execution themselves, adjust the parameters, make sure that they hone these things down so that they allow them to fit within the business model that they're running. So that's another huge key piece to having the TMS and having your data reside in the TMS for planning purposes. So this is actual daily operations. We also use this tool for historic data modeling, as Mike and Tom were talking about earlier. The same tool that we would use to do that.
You know, when we approached implementation, we knew that we needed to get some burn-in. We needed time for our clerks and coordinators to really understand how to use the system. When we first began to implement the TMS, we did so by saying we're going to deal with freight to customer first. It was the biggest opportunity for savings with optimization and consolidation and those sort of opportunities. We also wanted to be very mindful of what other departments the TMS was going to touch. So we wanted to make sure that the TMS would tie into the general ledger on the back end. So when we set this up, we knew what we wanted it to do, and Tom's team was there to really customize it and to help us understand how to use it. So the coaching, the training and whatnot initially came right straight from Tom's group. Then, after we understood how to use it, we were able to train our coordinators and our clerks to use the system as well. From a high level, we were able to use the system to make strategic decisions. But from a lower level, as clerks and coordinators, the TMS acted as a mechanism, a platform to allow them to make transactional, tactical decisions that are about a particular lane or a particular region. They understand transit times. They understand the costs. They understand what carriers can provide what levels of service, all at their fingertips. And that was something that was time savings, and was able to allow them to make good business decisions that rolled up into cost savings for us. So initially, out of the box, 3 or 4 months after we started this, we started to see a return on the investment. And in the first year, we were well into the 7 figures. So that was dealing with freight to our customer. We already knew, Supply Chain Coach had already modeled the data for us. We already knew that dealing with freight in, so moving from our suppliers to our manufacturers, because we were shipping pretty optimally at the time, that there wasn't as much savings going to be realized, and it was a more comprehensive setup than freight to customer. So we waited until year 3 to really roll that out. And since we have, the savings have really come in resources, right, by allowing the vendors and suppliers to tender the freight through our system on our behalf. So we don't have to add additional resources to be moving and managing tenders of freight, and then also tracking and whatnot. The system and the vendor do that for us.
Yeah, and Mike, one of the things that really was pretty impressive that you guys were able to do, you have a fairly complex operation, the fact that you manufacture and then you use co-packers as well. And you really took working with the co-packers to another level. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
We needed a platform to really link. Well, it's a system solution that's very much representative of what's happening in the physical world, right? We have contract manufacturers and third-party distribution centers that are linked by transportation lanes. And there's going to be a shipper and there's going to be a receiver for each shipment, right? And there's a carrier, of course, that's transporting the goods. And we use the TMS to really facilitate the tendering of that purchase order or that sales order, and the transportation, the integration between the carrier's system and our TMS system, so that we have up-to-date, real-time status of where that load is, and then the receipt by the contract manufacturer. We're actually building a way to automate that so they can tell us that they did indeed receive what was sent to us. And if everything matches, right, the system will then post the receipt. So these are the types of automations that we're using the system to do. And 4 years ago, we would have never even explored this, because we were so behind the information gap, so behind the technology gap. But now that we're up to date and we just keep progressing and coming up with ideas, that's what a TMS can do for you. And certainly Supply Chain Coach has been instrumental in delivering these types of system solutions.
Well, and even more importantly, it's having the team assembled that can drive that, and Mike has done that as well, because you can only provide a certain amount of suggestions, but some of the creativity comes actually from the customer themselves, and Mike has certainly been instrumental in all of that. So the first thing really that we hopefully we got across is, don't feel that you shouldn't move forward. When you start to think about what really drives your cost and what drives to the bottom line, it is, if you can trim cost out of that, it drops to the bottom line immediately. It opens up a lot of opportunities. In all honesty, I can tell you that the cost to implement is less than 5% of the savings cost people have gotten out of it. So there's a real reason that you should really think about that really well. But more importantly, if you choose to do it, whether it's through a 3PL or whether it's through your own shipping, make sure you understand the process before you move forward. Because it is the process that you want to implement, not the system. And we see this mistake over and over and over again, where we actually have to go back and restart from the beginning and reconfigure the system to make it work the way it should and get away from all those workarounds. And then the other is when you look at the 2B and you really look at the second part after you've brought data, which is called the analysis, and then you model it, what is the impact that the cost to service and the service factor to customer? Because if you don't keep your customers happy, you're not going to keep them around. So using this tool to really think in that level helps you to do that. And then last but not least, the most important thing, once you've got the data down to line item detail in your system, it's now great data. So make sure that you're pulling it out every 6 months and reanalyzing it to see what are the next major steps that we should be taking to drive continuous savings.
I just want to take a moment to thank our many clients and 3PL partners that we work with, and also to invite everyone on the call to reach out and let us know what you got from today's presentation. And if you want to speak with Tom and Bob about your own situation, you can reach us at info@ or team@Supply Chain Coach. I know they would be very happy to talk about your unique business challenges